The Vatican has recreated St. Peter's digitally with the help of AI, allowing you to zoom in on every little niche, nook, and cranny from your device. If you can come in person, brace yourself. You'll be joined by more than 35 million visitors to Rome over the course of 2025.
The Vatican, of course, is no stranger to dramatic moments. However, finding a situation that would be more dramatic than the announcement of the next pope is difficult. This event was imbued with optimism and endless stories. And then came the dreadful moment, a blow that shook the very basis of the Catholic Church for Pope Francis. What was this terrible news? And what consequences might it have for the Pope's succession and the Catholic Church's further development? Join us as we dive into the shocking events that have caused havoc in the Vatican. Announcing the next Pope. The procedures involved in the selection of a new Pope embrace secrecy, forms of democracy, and, finally, spirituality.
With his retirement, the church leadership begins the necessary steps to find a new pope, a unique and unusual process whose origins date back centuries.
Pope Francis is not one to shy away from change, and when he began to publicly announce his intentions about the future of the papacy, it became clear that something significant had become possible. In the past, popes avoided expressing their choice of successors directly and left this matter to the conclave. However, the current Pope Francis, who is liberal and quite open about most issues in contemporary society, went further. It focused on the characteristics that the following pope should possess to govern the Church that faces numerous contemporary world challenges. To support his argument, Francis called for its openness, understanding that power belongs to God, and the need for a leader to engage in topical problems such as climate change, inequality, and interfaith dialogue. He named possible successors who were highly esteemed cardinals, but was careful not to appoint a successor directly. The Sistine Chapel of the Vatican, which is usually used for pope elections, turned into the center of expectation. The College of Cardinals was seen as a diverse institution, composed of cardinal and bishop members from around the world. Every vote was a vote that represented the faith of a community. A bombshell that upset the peaceful python dance of authority on this holy altar. Information that left the Vatican stunned. This moment, unlike faith, would be a test of the Church as an institution and its ability to remain relevant and incorrupt, especially during very hard times when other external forces would try to drag it down. What was this news that caused such dismay in the Church, and how would its effects be heard throughout the papal change? Exposing the catastrophic news. When tension grew to the highest level, rumors started to circulate of a crisis of an inconceivable dimension. It was apparent that the Vatican's financial structure was under a lot of pressure, as revealed by leaked documents.
Closer than most people would ever dream to get, Francesca and her colleagues are inspecting Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel as part of a yearly maintenance work.
A controversy on embezzlement of funds and inclined corruption charges, which involved senior personnel in the Holy See, emerged. Such revelations posed a direct threat to the Church's authority and cast the papal ascension into the shadows. The timing of this disclosure could not have been worse. While Pope Francis was busy trying to make the Church relevant in world affairs with moral authority, such scandals tarnished its reputation in matters of integrity. The activities of the Vatican's charitable organization, funded by the donations of the faithful, were also questioned. People who believed in it wanted explanations, and the need for disclosure arose to the surface. Adding to this problem were developments of issues in the security caused by hacks and cyber incidences in the Holy See, which involved sensitivity archives. Disclosure of sensitive conversations touching on the future strategies of the Church had a negative toll on the institution's future and trust. The systems of the Holy See were not only a technical problem, but a symbolic problem, a weakness in their structure. While these breaches were not insignificant, the magnitude of these practices cast further doubt on the oversight and operational integrity systems. As investigations progressed, high-ranking members of the Vatican administration were under scrutiny. Concerns were made about their supervision responsibilities and the organizational gaps that enabled the violations. Pope Francis, who had promised reform, now saw this commitment put to the ultimate test. To assess the extent of these revelations, committees were set, but each progression only served to complicate already sensitive matters. Further, when the extent of the scandal started coming out into the open, the Vatican was put on the back foot for having to answer questions about its systems seriously. How might this affect the soon-to-happen papal transition? The outside forces that regulate the Vatican. The problems of the Vatican were not restricted to political turmoil only.
Served in the Swiss Guard back in 1982. So it's more like a tradition for me. These are all the weapons.
The Church itself was not in a sound condition either. Adding external factors, geopolitical, cultural, and technology, pushed the problem even further. The scandal attracted the attention of the foreign media and significantly increased attention to the situation. Hearings sparked political debates and concerns. Some pundits accused the Church of wielding too much power, and the Church's critics called for more oversight of its financial operations. Also, the international movements for increased responsibility and openness of religious organizations began. Leaders of activism expected that the Vatican had to change the approaches to governance, focusing on establishing an independent external auditor to monitor the practices. Policies like these perfectly appealed to young Catholic generations with a rather low confidence level in traditional institutions. Such movements were supported by secular organizations, which enhanced the accountability crisis of the Church on the international level. At the same time, social media sites have become a ground for opinions. As with many such topics and hashtag campaigns, supporters and detractors posted their views and opinions from around the world using the hashtags Vatican Transparency and Church Reform Now. Since social media had interconnections that escalated controversies, it made the circulation of the Church's internal issues exponentially more significant than it originally was. Opinions came in droves, and sometimes they were baseless, contributing to the problems that the Vatican was experiencing. Increased numbers of external organizations and governments also exhibit a greater interest in Vatican operations. Civil societies that have been campaigning for changes in the financial practices of religious organizations also began to receive the support of the public, thus increasing pressure on the Holy See to increase its accountability. State authority focused on financial conduct, and some even warned of the possibility of increased regulation or sanctions, making it difficult for the Vatican to autonomously control its property and wealth worldwide. The Vatican was, therefore, in a position where it had to decide whether to keep up with such a fast-paced change or otherwise it would be seen and said that the Vatican is a social institution that is outdated in its ways. If such external factors persist, the Church can be negated even further from the already disappointed global society. Would changes in this direction be sufficient with Pope Francis's progressive leadership to meet these rising challenges? Papal leadership amid crisis. Pope Francis's orientation on simplicity and realism became the cornerstone during this time of chaos.
The Pope for his support and solidarity during the mass demonstrations these past few months. After the peaceful protests turned violent, Pope Francis made repeated calls for peace.
He briefly stood up to speak to the gathered faithful, pointing at the visions and stating that action would be taken. Francis urged the Catholic Church followers to focus on justice and promised that the guilty would be punished. He also worked with increasing efficiency in centralizing and streamlining the Vatican government. Audit checks were conducted separately to investigate financial issues, while measures to avoid such leakage in the future were implemented. This resulted in stricter financial regulations and an increase in overall transparency, which was the turning point in the Vatican's administrative culture. Pope Francis's desire for a synodal church, one that listens to others, regained importance as he tried to mobilize the global Catholic Church to combat structural problems. This approach was progressive, given his advocacy for collective decision-making as a route to change. Community engagements were initiated, whereby the clergy and lay people were encouraged to forward their opinions as to how the church could be fixed. Moreover, Francis, as a leader of millions, sought to bring interfaith leaders together to work together, because, as one points out, the world could benefit from religious unity and fight corruption. Interfaith dialogues that were expanded to include partnerships regarding moral administration are frequently mentioned as a distinctive aspect of his papacy. Along with providing resources to people and churches and slow communication with the community, Pope Francis also appealed to the audience. One can notice that public addresses addressed issues of responsibility and repentance, as the Church sought to reconcile with the global congregation through the encouragement of the Vatican. Meanwhile, the two crises, financial scandal and data breaches, had paradigm shift effects on the papal succession. Those who were part of the conclave were subjected to pressure that the cardinals had never seen before due to the new transparency people wanted in the election process. The next pope would have to take charge of a church in crisis. It must be that whoever ascends to this Christian pinnacle possesses a spirit both divine and earthly, as well as the ability to govern uniquely. Characteristics such as tenacity, integrity, and vision for transforming the stations also emerged as essential. People questioned the likelihood of the new leader coming from a less represented part of the world in the past, including Africa or Asia, which would ensure that the Catholic Church represents countries from all over the world. Some questioned if it is possible that a more young pope would be more effective in appealing to the generation that grew up with the internet. Criteria for leadership changed with time as new concerns cropped up. The goal of reform, the adoption of technology, and the awareness of the socio-political realities of the world also came to the forefront. The next pope would need to lead with a dual focus, maintaining the spiritual authority and purpose of the Church, while updating its organizational structures and bureaucratization processes to meet the requirements of the 21st century society. These discussions pointed to the development of a new form of papacy within the context of a world rapidly transforming technologically and culturally. When the dust cleared, the Vatican's next steps were still uncertain. Change in the organizational culture was not an easy and quick process that could be achieved in one go. Effective and long-term efforts were needed to rebuild the broken trust among the faithful. The Church was to provide moral leadership to its people, hence the need to get back to them via new accountability, truth, and ethical management systems. The maintainability of the spiritual legacy in today's world has become one of the most profound concerns at the Vatican. The ability to modernize governance while maintaining traditional elements would be the double-edged sword that would challenge such a society's innovative and creative side. Ethics and governance collaboration with outside experts immediately initiated cooperative reform. And while this is on, Let us do a little history lesson on how the Vatican came into existence, shall we? The origins of the Vatican. The Holy See, the heart of the Catholic Church. As a global institution, remains an institution with histories heaped as deep as its influence. However,
St. Peter's Basilica, it's one of a series of projects all over Rome. Major tourist attractions are getting cleaned up before the new year.
their roots can be considered more ancient and date back to St. Peter, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ, known as the first pope. St. Peter was believed to be buried underneath, where the Basilica of St. Peter adorns today after being martyred. For centuries, this place has evolved and become the most important religious center of Christianity. In the early 4th century, the Edict of Milan, issued by Emperor Constantine, legalized Christianity within the Roman Empire. He was a great supporter of the construction, and with his help, the first basilica was built on Vatican Hill, which gave it the significance of a religious site. When Christianity began to develop, the bishops of Rome, later known as popes, gained influence and power. The temporal aspect of the papacy saw an astounding growth in the Middle Ages, with the popes controlling even kings and emperors. Notably, the formation of the Papal States in the 8th century can be considered a turning point. These territories, encompassing a large area of central Italy, were governed directly by the Pope, who combined religious and political power. That role paved the way for the formation of the Vatican, which served both as a religious sanctuary and a political empire. Nevertheless, the process of Italian unification of the 19th century claimed the territories of the Papal States, thereby restricting the Pope's temporal sovereignty to Vatican City, the world's smallest independent nation formed under the Lateran Pact of 1929. Over time, with the passing of history, Vatican City grew into a world power. During the Renaissance, it also spread its active influence on art and culture, in addition to faith. The fact that Michelangelo was commissioned to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is a clear testimony to the chapel's cultural significance. Likewise, the works of Raphael and Bernini turned Vatican City into a sightseeing architectural and art marvel. From then to the present, 266 popes have been crowned in the Vatican, and every pope has his own story etched in the country. The papacy, starting from the ascetic Saint Gregory the Great to systemic reformer Pope John XXIII, has had its periods of volatility and achievements. Hidden underneath the glorious facade of the Vatican is a network of passages, corridors, and rooms that have inspired historians, theologians, and conspiracy theorists alike. Records in Vatican Secret Archives, more recently called Vatican Apostolic Archives, span centuries, and many remain closed to the public. These archives hold documents on essential events, such as the trial of Galileo and World War II correspondence. Historians and other scholars who get access to these archives invariably emerge with new knowledge that alters historical understanding.
It's the Pope's library, but it contains much more than just church documents. There are manuscripts going back nearly 2,000 years on music and math, warfare and exploration.
While limited access sustains gossip about other secret documents. One of the most prevalent concerns is the prophecy of the popes, traced back to Saint Malachi. This writing dates back to the 12th century and is believed to contain prophecies of future popes. Although it has never been considered a genuine work of art, its far-fetched connections to particular historical occurrences have intrigued believers. Many believers have remained worried about the prophecy that predicts the present pope will be the last. The Swiss Guard is another intriguing component of the Vatican's past that raises several questions. It is composed of 134 men and has existed since 1506. It is responsible for the security of the Pope. Their outfits are colorful with medieval armor. And their actual duties today are intelligence and security. Due to the rigorous selection process and secret operations of the Guard, more questions are raised about this organization's function. Compounding the drama in all this is that the Vatican had been playing a part in geopolitical chess. Many people may not realize it, but the Holy See was also an active participant in the Cold War, albeit a very passive one. Its communication paths and diplomatic services remained discreet, but actively helped mediate between warring parties. Texts of this period include suggestions for secret missions and deals, the full details of which remain unknown to this date. These secrets and controversies define the dark side of the Vatican, a mystery that juxtaposes the spiritual and political realms. But on a deeper level, this influence is not just religious, but rather political and economic, and links directly to the history of the world. What terrors can be hidden in its sacred walls themselves? And how do these discoveries affect the Church as an institution? The dark side of splendors. All in all, the Vatican, as the spiritual capital of the world, looks quite pure, but it has its sins. Various controversies, such as corruption, misuse of people, and politically related malpractices have stained the organization. The Church has been on the spot for a long time, responding to subsequent accusations of clergy non-consensual acts. Survivors and advocates asserted that the Vatican has failed to give justice to these cases, and most of the time, it is kept under wraps. There is also the political aspect of the Vatican's history. During the Renaissance, the papacy participated in the power struggle between European monarchies, which often masked the Church's religious function. This period is best illustrated by the scandalous Borgia family, with Pope Alexander VI involved in certain acts of nepotism, corruption, and scandals. As appearances were maintained and the common populace was deceived, the papal court became a political stage of power negotiations and betrayals.
The numbers are in. According to the Vatican, over 2.5 million people took part in papal ceremonies in 2011. The number actually shows an increase over the past 3 years.
Another unpleasant period is connected with the Inquisition. Formed to fight against heretics, the Inquisition, which had some laws such as torture and the death penalty, contradicted the concept of compassion presented by the Church. Over the subsequent years, the Vatican has attempted to come clean and apologize for these actions, but their impact remains sensitive. There were instances like the condemnation of Galileo, where science was stifled, showing a conflict between faith and knowledge. Some criticism has been directed towards the gross luxuriousness of the Vatican itself. The enormous amount of wealth blended into its art. Architectural designs of buildings, castles, and other clothes used during its ceremonies clearly disagrees with the poverty level experienced by the followers. People ask themselves whether such a lavish lifestyle can be taken from the teachings of Jesus, who was a man of humbleness and service to the needy. The Vatican defends its opulence as religious and historical artifacts. Still, the gap is unresolved. For all these, the Vatican continues to represent hope and faith among hundreds of millions of Catholics. In this respect, its ability to overcome these obstacles serves as a reminder that belief remains a strong force in today's world.
In 2025, he plans to intensify his meetings with the faithful. In addition to the public catecheses on Friday, his schedule will also include them on Saturdays.
Despite its imperfections, this conflict between its light spiritual themes and its sordid past forms an interesting tale that is otherwise a successful struggle and renewal. When the Western Roman Empire expanded and deteriorated in the 5th century, the Church became the power that ruled over the broken kingdoms. But just this period can be marked as the period of the Church gaining temporal power strengthening, including at the expense of scientific achievements and freedom of thought. The Church began to institute monastic schools, where scripts written by scribes were copied from the available old manuscripts. These monasteries made sure that the scholarly traditions of Greece and the Roman civilization did not completely vanish, and formed the foundation for the rebirth that was the Renaissance. At the same time, religious power concentrated in the hands of the Church, and it directed feudal lords' actions, decisions, and military actions on the battlefield, and in civil matters. The Crusades represent this paradigm well, a religious drive tied to political agendas, resulting in hundreds of years of war, as well as cross-cultural interaction. During the Dark Ages, the Catholics were spiritually directing people while at the same time flexing muscles for political influence. The papacy demanded the subjection of the monarchs and asserted the idea of the monarchy of the Pope.
The Catholic Church will have 21 new cardinals. All will be electors except one. This was announced by the Pope at the Angelus.
This assertion was most famously put into practice in the tug-of-war between Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV in the investiture controversy, which was a clash over who had the authority to appoint bishops. Such disputes also highlighted the versatility of the Church as an organization that was both religious and political. One of the most significant aspects of the legacy of the Church is diplomacy. The Holy See formally recognizes more than 180 countries in the world, and often they act as a negotiator in an international conflict. This diplomatic ability can be well attributed to its traditions, where it participated in negotiating for treaties and alliances during the feudal period in Europe. Perhaps one of the most interesting contemporary associations of the Vatican is with the British monarchy. Although the Church of England severed its connection with Rome when it was founded by Henry VIII, the last few decades show that this split has been healed. The British monarchy and the papacy have focused confidently on fostering understanding between distinct religious establishments that exist across the world and fighting major causes such as global poverty and climate change. This is accompanied by symbolism and high-profile meetings to portray a certain kind of relationship. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth II indeed had audiences with several popes, and she stressed the fact that similarities on issues such as morality prevailed, even though differences in religious beliefs existed. The Pope and Queen Elizabeth II.
An historic meeting at the Vatican where Pope Francis greets Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen gave the pontiff a gift basket filled with, among other things, whiskey and some honey.
It was the first meeting between the two.
Also work together in philanthropic projects, as their organizations promote noble causes across the world. Such interactions changed the stereotype of historical confrontation and the desire for mutual respect and cooperation. What do you think of the lack of security within the Vatican? Do you think that maybe there are traitors within their midst? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.